I don't know what happened here with the Vergil Ortiz, David Avenesian fight, because all of a sudden it's not taking place. Instead, Vergil Ortiz is fighting Michael McKinson. Now, he was supposed to fight McKinson, wasn't he? A few months ago. But Ortiz was forced to pull out and McKinson fought against somebody else on that card. So they've rescheduled the McKinson fight. I guess I understand that. But did they have to? Were they contractually obliged to? What happened to Avenesian? I said at the time when this Ortiz-Avenesian fight was apparently being negotiated behind the scenes that the fact it was an eliminator doesn't necessarily mean that the sanctioning body put the fight together, that the sanctioning body ordered the fight. Very often in boxing, two teams will come together and they'll decide that their guys are going to clash. And after they've agreed to fight, they lobby the sanctioning body to make it an eliminator. That's often how it works. Not always, but often how it works. Because a lot of people were assuming that Ortiz wasn't voluntarily fighting Avenesian, but he'd basically been forced into it effectively by the sanctioning body that said to him, look, either fight this guy or lose your ranking, etc. Again, that isn't necessarily the case, as I've just explained. Regardless of all that, what is going on with David Avenesian in general? He beat Josh Kelly several years ago now, right? And you would have thought he would have gone on to bigger and better things, perhaps even challenging for world titles, etc. But it hasn't happened like that for Avenesian. Now, I don't know Neil Marsh, Avenesian's manager. Don't know him, never spoke to him, got nothing against the guy. But I just want to ask some questions about Neil Marsh. All right, that's all I'm doing here. Some questions that maybe you guys can help me answer. Every time I've seen Neil Marsh in an interview, in a press conference, etc., he comes across as quite combative. In the press conference for the Josh Kelly fight, for example, he was really laying into Adam Booth, and subsequent to the Josh Kelly fight, he's had some choice words for Eddie Hearn, etc., etc. So he seems like quite a combative individual, and I get it. He's passionate about his clients, the fighters he represents. He's trying to fight their corner. He's trying to get them the best deal. He's trying to make sure they don't get railroaded in negotiations. So that's all well and good. But strong arm tactics are not going to work every time. In fact, they can work against you, particularly if you're the B side. And I just wonder, again, I'm just asking a question. Has Neil Marsh rubbed a lot of people up the wrong way? Is that why certain fights are not happening for David Avenesian? I know that he's kind of a chairman of the Who Needs Him club in the welterweight division. He's a dangerous guy, but doesn't have much of a profile. Therefore, who would want to fight him? I get that. But is there also an element, potentially, again, it's just a question, of his manager, Neil Marsh, maybe being a little too aggressive in negotiations, as I say, rubbing people up the wrong way, and that actually being a hindrance for David Avenesian? He kind of reminds me a little bit of Joe Gallagher, because Gallagher was also very combative and he's very passionate about his fighters. But if you look at the fallout that Gallagher had with Eddie Hearn, right? And subsequent to that, he took a lot of his fighters off Eddie Hearn shows, or perhaps Eddie Hearn just wouldn't give his fighters shows, whatever the case may be, or at least some of them. Because isn't Callum Smith still with Joe Gallagher? He at least trained by, I'm not sure if he's managed by. But the guys who Joe Gallagher has taken elsewhere, such as Callum Johnson, what have they done since leaving Eddie Hearn, since no longer working with Hearn? Have they had really great opportunities? Doesn't appear so to me. David Avenesian certainly hasn't had great opportunities. So Neil Marsh is there complaining about Eddie Hearn and this, that, and the other. Is the situation his fighters are in now any better? Again, I don't know Neil Marsh personally, but he does come across as a bit combative. And when you're the B side, of course, you don't allow yourself to get railroaded, but you do have to make concessions and you do have to employ some diplomacy in negotiations. You can't just go in there, giving it the big un, expecting to get everything you want and expecting these A-side promoters and A-side fighters to take kindly to your approach. Everybody's got an ego at the end of the day. And generally speaking, the more successful somebody is, the bigger their ego is. So if you're coming in there and you're, trying to strong arm your way in negotiations or whatever, maybe they'll just look at you and say, I don't need to hassle with this guy. Who does he think he is? You know what I mean? I'm 10 times bigger than him commercially. I don't need this dude, etc. Is that what's going on with David Avenesian? It's a question. You guys help me answer it in the comments below. Now, as for Vergil Ortiz and McKinson, is me talking about Avenesian more than the subject of the video, which is Vergil Ortiz and, of course, Michael McKinson. Now, Ortiz has already been talking about moving up to 154 pounds, apparently. So I'm not sure how long he's going to be hanging around at welterweight. He's only 24. He's listed at 5'10", 70-inch reach. Is he really that tall? Maybe he is. I don't know, but appeared to be a bit shorter than that to me. So, yeah, Ortiz looks like definitely top fighter of the future. How far off is he from competing with the likes of the Errol Spencers, the Terence Crawfords, etc.? We are not quite sure. At least I'm not quite sure. Now, the Michael McKinson fight should be a fight that Vergil Ortiz wins. McKinson can box, but he has absolutely no power. And I've said many, many times, knockout percentage isn't always an accurate representation of how hard someone hits. Michael McKinson does have some degree of power. Ask Chris Congo. In fact, that's the first time that I saw Michael McKinson box was against Chris Congo. Prior to that, McKinson was an unknown. Even in the UK, this was an obscure fighter. At least for me and for most boxing fans, this was a fighter who came out of nowhere against Chris Congo. Managed to beat him pretty soundly, I would say. You've got some close scorecards here, 96, 94, 95, 94, but there is also a 97, 93. Dropped Chris Congo, and Congo must have been looking at Michael McKinson's knockout ratio thinking, this guy literally can't crack an egg. Well, he could crack an egg. He might not be able to crack much else, but he could definitely crack an egg. And Congo was a lot more respectful thereafter being dropped. So, yeah, McKinson, not a puncher, because 2 KOs in 22 fights is a horrible knockout percentage, isn't it? That's really horrible. But he can box, and you have to be able to box if there's such a lack of power there. He's certainly not a prolific puncher. If he's got more power than his record suggests, okay. But if you were a prolific puncher, of course, you'd have a high knockout percentage. But if you were a puncher full stop, it wouldn't be this slow. There are some punchers, there are some guys who can genuinely hit very hard, and their knockout ratio might be 50%. And I'm talking about guys with winning records. If you've got a guy with a losing record who can really punch, yeah, they might have a 10% knockout ratio because they lose most of their fights. But a guy with a winning record, an undefeated guy, 22-0, if he could punch at all, he's at least going to have a 50%. But if he's only got 10%, as it is the case with McKinson, or well, less than that, 9.09%, it's fair to say the guy can't punch. But can't punch is a relative description, because there are going to be people who say that Alexander Usyk can't punch at heavyweight. Well, he's not Deontay Wilder, but he still can hurt people. He still can get people's respect. And so with Michael McKinson, what level of can't punch is he at? Is he totally feather-fisted to the point where he's never going to score a knockdown against anybody other than Chris Kongo. Or, I mean, you look at Paulie Malignaggi, for example. I guess that's a good person to compare McKinson to. Malignaggi couldn't punch, but he did manage to stop. What was the guy called? Shenchenko? Was that the guy, Andrei Shenchenko? The guy that stopped Ricky Hatton? Managed to stop him, busted up his face. And one thing about McKinson, which he shares in common with Malignaggi, not just the lack of punching power, is the confidence. McKinson has a swagger in the ring. That's what I noticed in the Chris Kongo fight. He's got a swagger in the ring. Even though he can't punch, he fights like a guy, or he has the confidence of the guy. Not fights like a guy, because he's a boxer, not a guy who's looking to knock people out. He has the confidence of a guy who can punch. Do you know what I mean? Like, most punchers have a certain confidence about them. And McKinson has that despite the fact he's not a puncher. Malignaggi was the same. Malignaggi was, held his head high, figuratively speaking, chest out, fully believed in himself. And he went in there not caring about the fact that he was completely outmatched in terms of punching power against virtually everybody he fought. Malignaggi still maintained a high level of confidence. And I see the same thing with Michael McKinson. With all that being said, will it be enough to beat Vergil Ortiz Jr.? I suspect not. I'm not going to write McKinson off completely. I think that he is a good boxer, tricky southpaw, technical, but I don't think it will be enough to defeat Ortiz. I'm expecting Ortiz to get to him, maybe beat him on points or stop him in the second half of the fight. Of course, McKinson has never lost, so he's going to fight tooth and nail. He's going to fight very, very hard, but ultimately, I don't think it will be enough. Let me know what you guys think in the comments below. If, McKinson was able to pull off the win here, and it's a very tall order, of course, it's in the United States. And when you go to a guy's backyard and you're a boxer, you're not going there to beat him up and knock him down several times, etc. It can be very difficult to get a decision, although we've seen in recent times it has happened. We saw it obviously with Devin Haney beating Kambosos, and so on, with Dmitry Bivol beating Canelo. And they didn't beat the guys up, right? They just outboxed them comprehensively. McKinson would need to do something similar against Ortiz. He would need to make it so one-sided in terms of outboxing Ortiz that it would just be totally outrageous for them to give Ortiz the decision. Can McKinson do that? I'm going to say he can't. Let me know what you guys think in the comment. I'm saying, look, excuse me, McKinson might be able to, and I don't think he's going to even be able to do this. I think Ortiz is going to win legitimately, right? But if I can think of a plausible scenario in which McKinson deserves to win, I think it would be him deserving to win by maybe 2 rounds, something like that, 3 rounds. I don't see a scenario where he deserves to win 10 rounds to 2. Do you know what I mean? But then gets jobbed on the cards. I don't see that. But either way, my perspective on this is that Ortiz wins legit anyway. So let me know what you guys think in the comments below.